Hello, I'm Wolf Blitzer. It's 1 p.m. here in Washington, 8 p.m. in Moscow, 9:30 p.m. in Kabul, Afghanistan. Wherever you're watching from around the world, thanks very much for joining us.
This is CNN Breaking News.
We're following breaking news. We're waiting to hear directly from Jared Kushner from the White House. You're looking at the microphone there outside the West Wing. The president's son-in-law and trusted advisor spent much of the day so far up on Capitol Hill answering questions from Senate Intelligence Committee staffers. At any moment now, we're told we expect to hear directly from Kushner. He'll be making a public statement. We'll have live coverage of that as soon as it happens. We expect that to begin momentarily. In the meantime, let's bring in our senior White House correspondent, Jeff Zeleny. He's over at the White House. Our national correspondent, Suzanne Malveaux, is up on Capitol Hill. Suzanne, first of all, take us through what happened so far over the course of these past few hours during Kushner's meeting up on Capitol Hill. Other than Jared Kushner's account, will we be hearing any of his statements so far to these congressional staffers?
Well, Wolf, it was true to form about 2 hours or so, as it was promised, going before the staffers, the Senate staffers of the Senate Intelligence Committee. It was Jared Kushner, his attorney, Abby Lowell, and a note taker. Also present there about a half dozen Senate staffers, and a transcript that was taken of that interview, a transcript that the legal team says that they certainly do not object to being made public. That is something that we don't know when it will be made public, but it certainly will be available. Also, we were told before this meeting that, according to a source, that Jared Kushner would take all questions. Our Ted Barrett, producer, asked him on his way out whether or not he, in fact, did do that. He said, yes, he had all the questions that they had. He said that it went very well. He is on his way to the White House, and we do know this was not sworn testimony, but tomorrow he's going to go before the House Intelligence Committee. That will be sworn testimony, also expected to be interviewed before members of that committee, not just the staffers, and that a transcript would be made available. As you know, Wolf, this is all a part of a very concerted effort, an orchestrated effort, if you will, to show some transparency from Jared Kushner and his team going to the White House to make a statement very shortly. Wolf?
Even though, Suzanne, it was not sworn testimony, you can't lie to congressional staffers or congressional members. If you do, that's a crime. So where do we stand right now, Suzanne, on Donald Trump Jr., Paul Manafort, the former campaign chairman, and their appearance before these various committees?
Well, Wednesday, the Senate Judiciary Committee is going to be taking a look at some notes, some records that were provided by Donald Trump Jr. as well as Paul Manafort. They have been behind the scenes negotiating with this committee. A lot of people quite frustrated that Donald Trump Jr. is not going to be testifying publicly as he initially had offered, but rather behind the scenes working out these negotiations for these records. Also interviews to follow later with the staffers and potentially with those committee members before any kind of public testimony. Senator Chuck Grassley, who's the chair of that committee, kind of defensive, if you will, in these tweets, a series of tweets that he's been sending out, he and Senator Dianne Feinstein. The latest one saying, here I'm going to read it, Wolf, that on-record interview with my and Senator Feinstein's staff for hours is no walk in the park, can be tougher than few minutes with members in hearing. So a little bit of pushback from Grassley today saying, look, you might not necessarily publicly hear their testimony anytime soon, but bottom line that Dianne Feinstein said is they will get some answers, or at least they are determined to, Wolf.
Very interesting. Suzanne, stand by. Jeff, the son-in-law, the president's senior advisor, while he was facing some of those tough questions, the president was tweeting this, among other things. Let me put it up on the screen. So why aren't the committees and investigators, and of course our beleaguered AG, Attorney General, looking into crooked Hillary's crimes and Russia relations? Talk to us about this very, very controversial tweet, the apparent message to the Attorney General of the United States, the former Senator Jeff Sessions, calling him beleaguered.
Well, certainly very interesting if you dissect that. I mean, one, the president obviously trying to redirect attention to some other things. I mean, as his son-in-law is, before the committee behind closed doors. This is pretty extraordinary, Wolf. This marks a new chapter in this ongoing investigation here. someone in the president's family, certainly his inner circle as well, on Capitol Hill. So the president certainly trying to divert attention, if you will. But if you look at that carefully, Wolf, I was most struck by the Attorney General's comments. He called him beleaguered. This is the Attorney General of the United States, Jeff Sessions, one of the earliest supporters of this president. It is the latest attempt from this president to try and draw attention to Jeff Sessions. He's very displeased with him, as we know, because he recused himself from this Russia investigation. But Wolf, it continues to beg the question, does the president want his Attorney General to stay on? I am told that they have still not had a face-to-face meeting since that interview last week with the New York Times, when the president just exploded and unloaded on his Attorney General. So, Wolf, that was very interesting there in those words. But I think, as Suzanne was saying, I believe what we're going to hear from Jared Kushner as he stands outside the White House momentarily is talking a bit more about his answers to the questions this morning. And he put out a fairly extraordinary 11-page document this morning that talked about the 4 specific meetings he had with the Russian officials. And let's break those down for just a second. I think we have this. The first is a handshake that he had with the Russian ambassador. That was during a speech at the Mayflower Hotel. The second, of course, this meeting we've talked about so long, in June 2016, the meeting with the Russian lawyer that he says he was trying to extract himself out early. The second 2 are after the election, of course. He had a meeting with the ambassador, the Russian ambassador to the U.S. on December 1st, 2016. And then again on December 13, Wolf, this could be the most important one of all, a meeting with a Russian banker who is very close to Vladimir Putin. So those are the 4 specific elements that Jared Kushner went into the meeting talking about. Now, we did not know about all of these meetings, so that, of course, is something that the Senate staff was certainly burrowing in on. But we do not believe that Jared Kushner will take questions when he speaks this afternoon in just a short period of time here, Wolf.
He will be making a rare public statement. We'll have live coverage. That's coming up fairly soon. Our
Right.
Jeff Zeleny, Suzanne Malveaux, guys, thanks very much. As we await Jared Kushner and his statement, let's talk about what the latest developments are all about. With us here, our chief political analyst, Gloria Borger, our chief political correspondent, Dana Bash, our CNN legal analyst, Laura Coates, and Ryan Lizza, CNN political analyst, Washington correspondent for the New Yorker magazine. Like all of us, Gloria, you've gone through the 11-page document. Pretty extraordinary that in advance of this interview he had with these congressional staffers, he publicly released what he was about to say, and then he stood around for about 2.5 hours or so answering their questions. All of this is very dramatic.
Well, it is very dramatic, and he kind of took a page from Comey's book by putting his testimony out there, although he isn't testifying publicly as the former FBI director did. And I think he felt that he needed to answer all the questions about those 4 particular meetings, which, by the way, the media has written about and knew about. I think there are still questions that need to be answered, and I think that this is probably what they're talking about behind closed doors. I think they're going to want to know more about his ties to Russians as a result of his business. He was very careful today to say, I have not relied on Russian funds to finance my business activities in the private sector. That's a very, carefully written statement. And I think they're going to want to know more about the analytics that he headed up during the campaign, because there have been some stories about whether the Russians had tried to hack into a lot of analytics. And so I think these are going to be areas that they're going to pursue. But as for these 4 meetings, he made it very clear there was nothing nefarious there.
Dana, we've covered Congress, all of us, for a long time. Usually somebody who is a witness releases an advanced statement before an open hearing. This is what I'm about to say in my opening prepared remarks. Rarely, I don't remember a time when I've seen someone release a statement like this before a closed-door private session, not with senators or congressmen, but with staffers.
It's absolutely unusual, but it is in keeping with what is clearly the Kushner strategy, his legal team strategy, which is not to say much about the individual news stories that have come out about pretty much definitely everything that he mentions in this 11-page guess, document, testimony, whatever we'd like to call it, everything from his meeting with the Russian ambassador to the meeting that was during the transition back to June of 2016 when he attended the meeting that Donald Trump Jr. set up with the Russian lawyer. So it is unusual, but and my point in saying it's in keeping with their strategy, they wanted to control it. They wanted to get it out all at once. And the narrative that we're hearing from Kushner world, and I know Gloria's heard this too today, is, they might have taken a hit, and they clearly did take a hit in public relations for the past several months by keeping this all to themselves and waiting until they got it all together in one big document, but that they wanted to show that they're kind of playing within the confines of the investigations and that they wanted to preserve this information for the Senate investigators to make it clear, at least to appear to be cooperating as much as they can.
He was joined, Laura, in this session. Abby Lowell is a well-known lawyer here in Washington, his new lawyer. He was right there. He's had enormous experience in dealing with these kinds of issues. What's the difference between testifying or answering questions before staffers as opposed to a formal session where you're sworn in before members of Congress?
Well, the consequence of saying a falsehood would be the distinction here. But in reality, in public relations or in terms of legally speaking, if you present misinformation and you intentionally try to mislead congressional staffers, Congress, the public, you do have a public relations act. You also have a legal consequence as well. What they're trying to do, and you're right, by getting ahead of the story and crafting the narrative, that 11-page document said to me that lawyers had their hand in ensuring that whatever Jared Kushner said was not about having malicious intent, that he was trying to show that he did not have the ill will or intent to satisfy a legal doctrine, that he was perhaps the unwitting, overwhelmed person who was asked to multitask in too many ways. And in doing so, I think he has shielded himself from a lot of legal ridicule. He has not exonerated his fellow campaigners, however, did not mention much of them. But what you're seeing here is a very carefully crafted narrative to try to avoid having any legal consequences of whatever testimony he does ultimately give.
And even though he wasn't sworn in, if he lied, that's a crime.
Yes, and the idea that you would just be able to say, well, I'm lying to the media, we're out of that at this point in time. We're talking to congressional staffers who will then turn over information that their congressman will rely upon to then be able to investigate further. And you are now seeing somebody who's aware of the consequences. We're out of the political realm. You're in the legal realm right now. Remember, Jeff Sessions fell into this trap in a way of giving a statement, even though it was for a congressman, Al Franken, by giving information that was not comprehensive enough to allow people to say, I understand you're not trying to mislead the public and Congress.
I want to, Ryan, get through this very controversial tweet from the president today, and I'll put it up on the screen. So why aren't the committees and investigators, and of course our beleaguered AG, Attorney General, looking into Crooked Hillary's crimes and Russia relations? It's a pretty extraordinary tweet going after the Attorney General of the United States.
Well, it's a little
hold on a second. Here comes Jared Kushner walking out of the West Wing of the White House down the driveway to the microphone. A rare public statement. Let's listen in.
My name is Jared Kushner. I am senior advisor to President Donald J. Trump. When my father-in-law decided to run for president, I served his campaign the best I could because I believe in him and his ability to improve the lives of all Americans. And now, serving the president and the people of the United States has been the honor and privilege of a lifetime. I am so grateful for the opportunity to work on important matters such as Middle East peace and reinvigorating America's innovative spirit. Every day, I come to work with enthusiasm and excitement for what can be. I have not sought the spotlight. First in business and now in public service, I have always focused on setting and achieving goals and have left it to others to work on media and public perception. Since the first questions were raised in March, I have been consistent in saying that I was eager to share any information I have with the investigating bodies, and I've done so today. The record and documents I have voluntarily provided will show that all of my actions were proper and occurred in the normal course of events of a very unique campaign. Let me be very clear. I did not collude with Russia, nor do I know of anyone else in the campaign who did so. I had no improper contacts. I have not relied on Russian funds for my businesses. And I have been fully transparent in providing all requested information. Donald Trump had a better message and ran a smarter campaign, and that is why he won. Suggesting otherwise ridicules those who voted for him. It is an honor to work with President Trump and his administration as we take on the challenges that he was elected to face. Creating jobs for American people, keeping America safe, and eliminating barriers to achieving the American dream. Thank you very much, and I look forward to taking questions from the House committee tomorrow. Thank you.
All right, not sticking around answering reporters' questions, and there are a lot of reporters' questions. He did answer questions for more than 2 hours earlier up on Capitol Hill from this closed-door meeting with congressional investigators, repeating now publicly what he said in his opening statement, a statement that he released before he went up to Capitol Hill today. He said, "I did not collude, nor know of anyone else in the campaign who colluded with any foreign government. I had no improper contacts. I have not relied on Russian funds to finance my business activities in the private sector." Basically, Gloria, reiterating publicly now, hearing his voice, which we haven't heard all that often, right. Reiterating what he said in this written statement.
You know, reiterating, but also taking it into the political realm, where he made it very clear, look, Donald Trump had a better message, he ran a better campaign, and suggesting otherwise ridicules those who voted for him. Meaning that this whole Russia controversy, you know, the implication is the whole Russia controversy is being perpetrated by Democrats who can't stand the result of the election. And it was, you know, it was a political statement coming from Jared Kushner.
Yeah, and I think to even sort of take that another step, we often talk about when people go out and speak for this president, they are speaking for an audience of one. That line was for that audience. Right. This is for you, you know, father-in-law, Mr. President. You know, I believe that anybody who questions the legitimacy of your election is belittling your voters. I did think that, you know, because this was legalese, and I want to know what you think of this since you're the lawyer here, I did not rely on Russian money for my businesses. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, I mean, he mentioned it also in the statement, but I think just even hearing him say it out loud, it doesn't say I didn't ask them for any money to help with, or didn't get any. I didn't rely on. So I thought that was interesting. And then just kind of big picture, the notion of him saying it back in March, that when this all started to go out in the press, that he started saying that, and I look forward to answering questions. He's trying to answer to the public relations question. You know, this whole thing is about his legal future and his legal culpability or potential culpability. But the reality is that by not saying the things he said in this statement or whatever he said behind closed doors and letting it stay out there in the public realm for months without a real public answer, has really contributed to his father-in-law and the president he's working for, his agenda being sidelined.
Laura, what did you hear in that statement?
Well, his statement essentially is why most people hate lawyers, because we talk in this, not me, of course, but every other lawyer besides myself, in a very nuanced way that's based on trying to clearly define terms that you cannot then hook to a criminal statute. The reliance questions, what I actually knew. One thing you always tell your clients are things like, do not try to remember. If you can remember it instantly, fine. But if you don't try, don't go out of your way to be proactively coherent or remember things about things happening. What you saw was that. The repetitive nature of what he already released to the public earlier today. But again, you have somebody who a few weeks ago was saying that he's more than willing and forthcoming to volunteer to come up and talk about all that he knows until a lawyer gets involved and says, listen, craft your response with an eye towards litigation, because anything you say can, should and will be used against you in the court of public opinion and certainly before Congress. And so he was very, very nuanced in his language, and nothing that he said, if you can look at it closely, nothing he said is an element of an intent or a crime you can actually hook to it. It's all about him saying, excuse me, I didn't know about this. I didn't ultimately rely on any of this information. And by the way, this is a political issue, not a legal one. Right.
Yeah. And Abby Lowell, his attorney, who's well regarded here in Washington, I'm sure vetted and went through every single word in this 11-page document.
Absolutely, and he should have, because again, there's a lot of consequences. So you got these two different, you have the congressional probe and the criminal probe led by Mueller, and you better believe that one and both of them will go hand in hand to try to prosecute or perhaps, in their minds, persecute somebody in the political world. And so it's essential it's vetted. It's not really a cowardly move to have vetted by a lawyer, but what it tells you is that he is very, very conscious of the fact that the ramifications are steep and varied.
He got political, as Gloria points out in his statement that we just heard over outside the West Wing of the White House, Ryan, and defending the president. But even in his written statement, he got some political points in there. At one point, he said it's also important to note that a campaign success starts with its message and its messenger. Donald Trump had the right vision for America, delivered his message perfectly. The results speak for themselves. Not only did President Trump defeat 16 skilled and experienced primary opponents and win the presidency, he did so spending a fraction of what his opponents spent in the general election.
I think maybe he was thinking that we would get bored after that first or second page and not read into the more juicy details that are contained in the rest of this document. His statement at the White House was mostly public relations, right? It is sort of remarkable that even the president's son-in-law feels necessary to do this, you know, Donald Trump is the greatest president ever routine that all of Trump's aides often do when they're before the cameras. We saw Scaramucci do that again this weekend. I think once you dig into this document, three meetings. What is interesting about three of the meetings, the one famous meeting in June of 2016 at Trump Tower, and then the two transition meetings, what's interesting is how aggressive and assertive the Russians are in getting to the Trump people, and frankly, how easy it was for them to open the doors into the Trump campaign. They got that meeting at, or at least representatives of the people with affiliations of the Russian government got that meeting during the June meeting. Then during the transition, the Russian ambassador got a sit down with Kushner. He says something that's, you know, newsworthy. He says that the Russian ambassador wanted Russian generals to get information to Trump about what's going on in Syria, and that's what the discussion about the secret channel at the Russian embassy was. That is the Russian government being very effective about getting into this new campaign. Most campaigns wouldn't have taken that meeting. And then the final meeting with Sergei Gorkov, this Russian banker who actually brought Kushner presents from his from Kushner's own ancestral homeland of Belarus, got in to see him, said he's a friend with Putin, and wanted to discuss, you know, X, Y, and Z. So what my takeaway is at least one version of events could be very naive campaign officials that the Russian government had great access to and ease in terms of getting meetings with them.
That's at least one of the points he made in this document is he was inexperienced. He didn't have a lot of political. He got a lot of real estate experience, business experience, not a whole lot of political experience.
It doesn't contradict the notion of the Russians trying to influence American elections.
Absolutely.
Right.
That is the whole investigation.
Sarah Murray's over at the White House. Sarah, you listened very closely, carefully to what we heard from Jared Kushner. What are you hearing from officials over there?
Well, I think it's interesting that it was Jared Kushner who came out and spoke on his own behalf. Now, he did it in front of the White House. That's going to cause a little bit of turmoil for some White House officials who would like the Russia investigation to be handled far apart from the West Wing. But it's telling that it was not someone else who was forced to come out and answer for what Jared Kushner said behind closed doors today. There was no spokesman speaking on his behalf. This is not something Sarah Huckabee Sanders was answering for today. They put Jared Kushner out here front and center to make his statement. Now, he did not field questions from the press. He did not answer whether he would be willing to make the comments he made privately and publicly in front of the Senate Intelligence Committee. But he did indicate that he's staying. He talked about the work that he's still doing here at the White House, and he did make it overtly political, saying that if you do question why Donald Trump is president, you're really undermining the people who voted for him, which I think is a telling message considering President Trump is heading back on the campaign trail in Ohio tomorrow. It's a safe bet, though. The questions are not going to end right here for Jared Jared Kushner. We know he's going to speak with House Intelligence, and there are certainly a number of questions he left unanswered. I heard your panel parsing the very intricate statement he put out, and it was very carefully worded. Certainly, we know that there are senators on the Hill who have already said that they have more questions for Kushner. This is a drumbeat, Wolf. It's not going to end here.
Yeah, there's going to be a briefing, but it's only going to be what they call a gaggle later today on Air Force One as the president gets ready to head out of Washington to West Virginia to address Boy Scouts later tonight, right?
Yes, that's right. It is going to be a gaggle, and we're told that is because President Trump will be speaking on his own behalf when he talks in West Virginia tonight. Again, look for where the president's head is. Does he stay on message as he's addressing a Boy Scouts group? Does he feel the need to weigh in on the news of the day, to weigh in on the fact that his son-in-law was on Capitol Hill talking about Russia today? This gives us a good clue of where the president's head's at. We saw this morning on Twitter. We'll see if he carries it to West Virginia tonight, Wolf.
We certainly will. All right, Sarah, stand by over there. We'll get back to you. Let's take a quick break. We're going to get reaction to what we just heard from Jared Kushner. There you see Senator Ben Cardin of Maryland. He's the ranking Democrat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Lots of questions for him when we come back. The presidential advisor, the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, strongly defending his actions regarding Russia. Just moments ago, Kushner repeated what he said in a written statement prior to meeting with Senate Intelligence Committee staffers. Listen.
Let me be very clear. I did not collude with Russia, nor do I know of anyone else in the campaign who did so. I had no improper contacts. I have not relied on Russian funds for my businesses. And I have been fully transparent in providing all requested information.
All right, let's get some reaction from Democratic Senator Ben Cardin of Maryland. He's joining us from Baltimore. Senator, so what do you think Jared Kushner's public declaration? He did not collude with Russia, nor does he know of anyone among the Trump associates who colluded with Russia. Everything he says he did was proper.
Well, certainly he hasn't been transparent. These meetings came out after the fact. He didn't volunteer that information. There is many questions that still remain. The clear point was that he did meet with Russian officials, with the Russian lawyer during the course of the campaign, in which the meeting was scheduled in order to get information about Hillary Clinton. These are very troublesome meetings. We need to know the substance. His comments today were basically trying to put a political spin on something that's very, very serious. So let's wait till we see all the facts. Let's do all the investigations. There's lots of meetings going on here, but it is very troublesome.
In his written statement that he released before his questioning by the committee staffers, he said he really didn't know what to expect in that meeting with that Russian lawyer. Donald Trump Jr. asked him to show up. He went there, said he spent about 10 minutes. It was pretty boring. He sent a text to his assistant asking for a phone call so he'd have an excuse to get out of there. He said he never had read that email chain discussing the alleged dirt that would be provided by the Russians against Hillary Clinton. This is all sworn. It's not sworn, but if you lie to a committee staff, you could go to jail for that. So do you believe him?
Well, obviously, some of this information is going to be very hard to establish one way or the other. But we know why the meeting was set up. We know that when you go to these types of political meetings, you want to have as much information in advance as possible. That's normal operating procedures. So it's hard to believe he didn't know what the purpose of the meeting was that he attended.
Yeah, well, that's what he says. He had no idea. He thought he was just going to see Donald Trump Jr., and he never read that full exchange. So where do you see this going from here?
Well, we're waiting for the investigation. Obviously, we want to see the facts. There's a lot of other moving pieces here. We know Russia was engaged in trying to influence our election. We know that these meetings were efforts by at least the Russian officials to get some more information. So what, in fact, did the Americans do at these meetings? Why did they take the meeting with the Russian attorney? That's one of the questions that need to be answered. So we want to certainly complete the investigations of our Judiciary Committee and our Intelligence Committee, the Department of Justice, Mr. Mueller's investigation. I've also felt we should have an independent 9/11 type commission take a look at what Russia was doing here in the United States. One thing is very clear. Russia was trying to compromise our free election system. We need to know how they were operating, who helped them, and to make sure this never happens again.
Quickly, because I want to move on and talk about this Russia sanctions legislation. What do you think of the way the president is treating your former colleague, the Attorney General of the United States, Jeff Sessions, right now? In that tweet that he put out this morning, he tweeted this, and I'll put it up on the screen one more time. Here it is. Well, I don't have it right here, but you know the tweet where he called him beleaguered.
Yes. Well, first of all,
here it is, right there. Let me read it, Senator. Hold on.
Yeah.
So why aren't the committees and investigators and, of course, our beleaguered Attorney General looking into crooked Hillary's crimes and Russia relations?
Well, the Attorney General is the Attorney General for the American people. It's not the personal lawyer for the President of the United States. It's the people's attorney. And it's the responsibility of the Attorney General to make sure that everyone complies with the law. He's not to be directed by the President of the United States as to what is to be investigated or what's not to be investigated. This is independent. Clearly, President Trump's trying to interfere with the independence of the Attorney General. That's absolutely wrong and should not be tolerated by anyone.
Let's talk about the Russia sanctions legislation. You're the ranking member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. The House and the Senate, they reached a deal over the weekend to slap Russia with new sanctions. The House is expected to vote on the bill as early as tomorrow. How significant is this legislation in light of Moscow's meddling in the U.S. presidential election?
Wolf, I think this is a very clear congressional message. We passed the bill 98-2 in the Senate. I expect you're going to see a similarly lopsided vote in the House. Very strong mandatory sanctions against Russia for their interference in our elections and what they continue to do in Ukraine and in Syria. The president is not allowed to withdraw sanctions without a congressional review first before he can give sanction relief. I think this is a very clear message from the Congress of the United States that we want action taken against Russia, additional sanctions, and we certainly don't want to see any sanction relief while Russia is continuing these type of activities against U.S. interests.
I want to quickly get your reaction to what the president also said the other day in that extraordinary interview with the New York Times when he referred to the Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, who served as a U.S. attorney from Baltimore for a long time. Let me put up the quote from what the president had to say. "Why didn't you tell me this before? I would have then said, 'Who's your deputy?' So his deputy, he hardly knew, and that's Rosenstein, Rod Rosenstein, who is from Baltimore. There are very few Republicans in Baltimore, if any, so he's from Baltimore." And then he added, we went through a lot of things. We were interviewing replacements at the FBI. What was your reaction when you heard his criticism of Rod Rosenstein, who was a U.S. attorney in Baltimore, highly regarded, a man I assume you know well? What was your reaction to that?
Well, Rod Rosenstein was very well respected as our U.S. attorney. He was not partisan at all. He worked very well with local officials. He clearly has Republican pedigree. That was not the issue. The issue was whether he would be an independent voice as U.S. attorney. Would he be an independent voice as Deputy Attorney General? We think he is. That's why we recommended him to President Obama to retain him as the U.S. attorney, Senator Mikulski and myself, and that is why we also supported his nominee for Deputy Attorney General. It's just outrageous that the president would demean Baltimore the way he does. It's not unusual. We know that he does those types of tactics. But I think it's just wrong to try to characterize the people of Baltimore. We want justice in this country. We want a U.S. attorney. We want an attorney general who's going to represent the interests of this nation. Everyone in this country, no one's above the law. Everyone needs to be held accountable.
Senator Ben Cardin of Maryland, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Coming up, the other big story hanging over Capitol Hill right now, the Republican plan to repeal Obamacare. The president is expected to address the issue just a couple hours or so as his leadership scrambles for votes. We'll have the latest when we come back. President Trump trying to step up the pressure on his fellow Republicans to pass a health care reform bill. The president about to make a statement later this afternoon. Earlier today, he tweeted this, quote, "Republicans have a last chance to do the right thing on repeal and replace after years of talking and campaigning on it." He also tweeted, quote, "If Republicans don't repeal and replace the disastrous Obamacare, the repercussions will be far greater than any of them understand." Let's go to our congressional correspondent, Phil Mattingly. He's joining us from Capitol Hill. Phil, first of all, update us on where the health care debate stands right now and what happens next.
Yeah, the big question, Wolf, is whether or not they can get the votes to actually start the debate on the bill. That's the goal for this week. Senate leaders are targeting tomorrow as the first opportunity to have that procedural vote. But I think the most interesting element right now, Wolf, is what you were laying out. The White House has really started a full-on public blitz. You've got the president's statement here in a couple hours. Over the weekend, you had Vice President Mike Pence in Ohio putting pressure on Senator Rob Portman, a Republican holdout up to this point. And then later this evening, the president travels to West Virginia, where Shelley Moore Capito, the West Virginia Republican senator, will be joining him. She is another holdout. This is the type of effort, Wolf, that we're used to in past administrations, and frankly, the type of effort you've heard from a lot of senior Republicans. They wish the White House would have been pushing up to this point. The real question becomes now, Wolf, is it too late? As they go into this week, nobody really thinks that they have the votes to move forward on this yet. This is some serious arm twisting by the administration. So the question becomes, can they turn these votes over the course of the next 24, 48 hours to really get this process on track? We'll have to wait and see.
We certainly will. We'll watch it together with you every step of the way. Phil Mattingly up on Capitol Hill. Up next, the new Russia sanctions bill is triggering mixed signals out of the White House. Will the president sign this bipartisan measure that puts more pressure on the Kremlin? Stay with us. Lawmakers are set to vote this week on slapping new sanctions on Russia over election meddling. The bill has wide support from both parties, but will the White House support it? It depends on who you ask.
He hasn't made the decision yet to sign that bill one way or the other. He'll make that decision when he makes it.
We support where the legislation is now, and we'll continue working with the House and Senate to put those tough sanctions in place on Russia.
Let's discuss this and more with our chief national security correspondent, Jim Sciutto, Margaret Tulloff, senior White House correspondent for Bloomberg News, and the new president of the White House Correspondents Association, and Jeff Mason. He's the White House correspondent for Reuters, the outgoing White House Correspondents Association president. Margaret, congratulations. Today's your first day as president.
It is. Thank you, Wolf.
Good work. Thanks. And Jeff, thanks for the good work you did as the outgoing president. What do you think of these conflicting messages? You cover the White House on a day we hear one thing from one person, another thing from literally with only a few minutes apart.
It's hard to say. My first impression when I heard those two clips was that maybe Sarah was more in the know and that Anthony hadn't actually discussed it with the president, because it doesn't seem like she would have gone out there and said he was going to support it if she hadn't had that conversation. But I don't know. I mean, and that will no doubt be something that they will realize they need to be sure and talk ahead of time and get their story on the same page. New
White House Communications Director, are you hearing that there could be some more changes, a little bit more shakeup coming up?
Well, you know, there are two things to watch for, and one is what changes he wants to install, and the other is really how he intends to serve. Does he intend to serve a traditional communications director role, or is this kind of the role that gets him in the door and then things shift around a little? I think Jeff is right that he's still getting his feet wet and familiarizing himself, although he's not on the clock just yet. He's at the White House now all day as we speak, and we may expect to see him traveling, but I think President Trump has very little room not to go along with the sanctions bill if that's what passes.
Because even if he doesn't, if he vetoes it, his veto will presumably be overridden. Enormous support in the House and Senate.
I think the question that I'd be looking for is there any sort of strings attached to his support or tacit support for this?
I was surprised by the conflicting messages we got from these two White House officials. You go out on the Sunday talk shows, you think you'd have a meeting, you know you're going to be asked about this issue, and you sort of come up with the same answer. Presumably that's what normally happens. Did not happen this time. You know, Jim, let's talk a little bit about the intelligence community. You and I were at that Aspen Institute forum over the past few days, the Russian meddling in the U.S. presidential election. At the Aspen Security Forum, we heard from current intelligence officials, the people the president appointed, who said they had no doubt. Listen.
There is no dissent, and I have stated that publicly.
Everyone's on board.
And I've stated it to the president.
I am confident that the Russians meddled in this election, as is the entire intelligence community.
No doubt at all, and I stand behind the intelligence community assessment that we produced.
No doubt at all, but in an extraordinary exchange that the new White House communications director had with Jake Tapper, we got a very different word from the President of the United States.
There's a lot of disinformation out there. You know, somebody said to me yesterday, I won't tell you who, that if the Russians actually hacked this situation and spilled out those emails, you would have never seen it. You would have never had any evidence of them, meaning that they're super confident in their deception skills and hacking. My point is, all of the information isn't on the table yet. But here's what I know about the president.
Wait, Anthony.
Let me finish.
Well, you're making a lot of assertions here. I don't know who this anonymous person is that said that if the Russians had actually done it, we wouldn't have been able to detect it. But it is the unanimous.
How about it was the president, Jake?
Okay, it's the consensus of the intelligence community.
He called me from Air Force One, and he basically said to me, "Hey, you know, this is maybe they did it, maybe they didn't do it."
All right, so everybody else, outgoing intelligence officials, the current intelligence officials, people he appointed, say it was the Russians. Everybody agrees except the president.
Listen, the president's creating his own reality here and defending his own reality, and is clearly still able to hire aides who are willing to defend that same reality that contradicts what the intelligence community has assessed here. And keep in mind, one of the arguments that some in his camp have used is, well, those were Obama administration appointees, the Clappers of the world, et cetera, who made this judgment, were in charge when the judgment was made. We saw Dan Coates there. He's President Trump's selection for Director of National Intelligence, the senior most intelligence official in the country, who said there is no dissent. And that gets to a second point that Trump and others have raised, saying, well, it was only 4 intelligence agencies, not everybody was on board, which is just frankly not true. And you hear Dan Coates there again saying there's no dissent. I mean, that 4 versus 17 debate, won't get into it, but a lot of those agencies, like the Coast Guard intelligence wing, have no business in identifying whether there was a hack. And yet the president continues to stick to this. We just don't know inside his head why he continues to stick to that at the expense of the credibility, really, of his own intelligence agencies.
Go ahead.
I think it all comes down to any concern that would undermine his victory. And you saw that in Jared Kushner's statement outside the White House just a few moments ago, where he said any suggestion about otherwise about why he won ridicules the voters who put him into the White House. And I think that's completely connected to his lack of desire to really embrace the intelligence on the Russia findings.
And, you know, I interviewed at that Aspen Security Forum, Margaret, the former Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, former CIA Director, John Brennan, and they said that the president's criticism of the U.S. intelligence community is so counterproductive. I want you to listen to some of what they said.
When the United States has to go to our partners and allies and say, U.S. intelligence has this information or has this assessment and we're looking for their support. What does it say as far as, you know, when we have something about our adversaries that our adversaries could say, well, that's U.S. intelligence. You already say that it's not worth, you know, the paper it's written on. These types of comments are just disgraceful, never should have happened, and the people who, and the person who said that should be ashamed of themselves.
I think the men and women of the intelligence community will continue to convey truth to power, even if the power doesn't necessarily listen.
They were both really outraged by the president's comparison to Nazi Germany of the intelligence community. It really irritated them.
We're all looking at Anthony Scaramucci to understand what sort of a new era it's going to usher in terms of messaging. But this really is something, a policy and an approach that is set from the top. And no change in staff can really shape what the president wants to do more than the president, and what he wants to do and how he wants to shape that, you know.
If I could just add, you were there, of course, witnessing that conversation with Clapper and Brennan was really a truly somber moment. To the former head of the CIA agency, years in the intelligence service under multiple administrations, former director of national intelligence, Clapper, years of service in the military and intelligence, and they were beyond exasperated. They were, it struck me, and I wonder if you shared this, they were sad.
Yeah.
They were sad about this assault on these institutions here, and that was really remarkable conversation.
Yeah, you could see the pain that they couldn't believe the president of the United States would speak about the intelligence community, the men and women, the professionals along those lines. So we're going to continue to have much more on all of this, but right now we're out of time. Jim, Margaret, and Jeff, thanks to all of you. Well, that's it for me. I'll be back 5 p.m. Eastern in the Situation Room. The news continues right after a quick break.